Welcome to the dungeon with Harlan and Andrew.
All right, hi, hello. We are live here on the dungeon.
Yeah.
I'm
Andrew Overdahl.
And I'm Harlan Kelly. This is a weekly talk show where we discuss all things running games, mastering the art of game mastering. And today we have a special guest, William Kuskin. Did I say that right?
Got it.
Good, great. I always stutter because I can imagine a million ways as soon as I almost say it. Yeah, thank you so much. It's an extra special one as you are a professor of medievalism. Is that a fair? Your
medieval literature.
Medieval literature.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm Andrew Overdahl.
Professor of medieval literature at CU Boulder.
Weekly talk show.
And actually, I'm not teaching medieval literature this semester.
Running
I'm teaching
games,
comic books.
mastering the art of game mastering.
Yeah,
And today we have
you have to put that in
guest,
Scarecrow.
William.
Right?
Is that right?
Comic books and
good, great.
teaching
I always stutter.
Professing comic books.
Because I can imagine a million ways.
But yes,
I
almost a blast.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's an extra special one.
Hold on just a second. We're having
an audio,
All right, hi, hello.
audio issue. We just got to adjust real quick for some reason.
Medieval literature.
Medieval literature.
Getting
Okay.
that little loop here.
Professor of medieval literature.
We're either muted or looped. We're cursed.
Yeah,
We
we're
clearly
cursed.
we crossed some sort of frost hag who cursed our stream, and we are unable to pull anchor without some sort of weird audio issue.
That audio routing always kind of sneaks around us. So, okay, cool, great, we're back. So, you're professor of medieval literature. But now you're teaching
books, yeah.
You're teaching
Now
comic books. I love it.
Are a whole bunch of comic books.
Well, wow, that's just like the D&D Venn diagram, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's the crossover.
And I love those newsstand racks. I got to get those for my house. It's such an ingenious way to keep your comics, and then they always seem fresh and exciting because it's like you're in the comic store with carte blanche to just read any comic as long as you want. It's great.
Yeah. It's totally the COVID option when you can't go out, right? You're just like, oh, what will I buy today? Oh, I have all these. And
I love it. And it looks good. Yeah, I gotta look into those.
The original Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh boy!
Whoa!
In the comic rack slot, you see there? That's a little.
Wow!
I love it.
Wow! That was probably ingenious.
He's thinking things there. I can see.
Well, so I mean, that transitions perfectly into the first question that we always ask guests, which is, can you tell us a little bit about your history with tabletop role-playing games? How did you get into them?
And I guess, I learned to reading comic books. And I remember a particular Iron Man issue, made the Tales of Suspense, where Tony Stark is running through the rain, his battery's running down, and he finds some jumper cables, and he hooks himself up to a car and, gets back in the action. And I guess that's my first reading memory. Well, God didn't like that. My first, and somewhere after that, I remember my friend Manny, this was back in New York City, introduced me to his friend David. And David, I must have been like 12, maybe 11. And David was maybe 13, so super cool, right? And not only that, he could draw. And he was doing a version of Death Dealer. He was copying Frazetta's Death Dealer, doing his own, and he was the coolest. So he painted the figurines, and he had us over to his house, and it was kind of a Stranger Things moment for me. We're like, oh my God, this is the Mithril Load, right? This is everything. David was a little older, and he went off and did his own thing, and Manny and I, we stopped being friends after a bit. But I got all my toys out. I also got, that was the basic set, which I guess came out 77, and then they did a bunch of versions. This wasn't the actual one, but I got this. And the basic set, boy, reading it now, this is the streamlined thing, right? Like, this is everything, right? That's it, just like a little pamphlet, the basic set. So I got the basic set, and I guess Manny and I played for a number of years. And then I played with another guy, Jeff, Jeff and I played a lot in New York City, and it was very much connected to my adolescence. And then at the end of high school, this was back in the 70s, early 80s, 82. Being nerdy was not cool. It was like not cool. There wasn't a website where you could be like, oh, I found my people. There was Jeff, and that was my people. So I guess by the time I was a senior, I'd stopped and went to college and then worked in advertising for a minute and then went back to graduate school. And in graduate school, I started studying medieval literature. And I have to say, I was a little snot. And
a graduate student? A snot? No way.
Right? A snotty graduate student. Medieval literature was hard. You had to learn Anglo-Saxon. You had to learn Latin. And of course, all this was the energy of D&D sublimated into snottyhood, right? Like, I won't be a nerd about it. And I guess nerds, I wouldn't be the first nerd to do this kind of the sublimation into snottiness. And actually, in Latin, so there's many stories to be told.
But that's I love that it's there's this that I like tickles a dream that I feel like a lot of people who fall down the wormhole of loving something have. Is like, I'm going to see this to this like end of the line here, and you fell in love with something when you were a kid, and then you had the opportunity and the drive to follow that through, and that's amazing. Like that, just hearing that story alone is just like, wow, I've spent many a late night hoping to achieve something like that. So that's awesome.
So it's interesting because honestly, medieval literature is as great as Dungeons and Dragons, and it's if you really give medieval literature its due. So the great thing about Dungeons and Dragons, right, is that it's immersive narrative, but at the same time, though metagaming is entirely frowned upon, right?
Yeah.
It is meta because it's about it. It isn't, and it's about it.
Yeah.
Talking on two channels always, right?
Yeah.
And then you're thinking about it. You're immersed, and then you're reflecting, and that's like, I mean, in a nutshell, that's like all of the artistic experience.
Yeah, Beowulf is just like this told story where like they are talking about who they are in it, and they're talking about the afterlife. They're talking about like what it means to be a human, and it's all like in the way they talk about it too. Yeah, I love Beowulf, but
it's the same two channels. It's like this incredible story where you can't stop, but at the same time, it's talking about how that story is constructed and where fits in culture, and it's meta and it's story. Chaucer is the absolute genius of this, right? Because he's never purely Geoffrey Chaucer, and he's never purely Geoffrey, and he's also the wife of Bath. He's role-playing while he's doing it.
Yeah, and he's having characters tell stories that is just like, they're
metagaming as with their characters. Oh my God, right? So it's like all these. But I'm here to tell you that the scholars of medieval literature are the worst rule lawyers you have. Like, be in the room and you're like, okay, guys, let's play. I dropped. And actually, you can't play. You can't play. So this got me really down. And to make a long story short, everything sucked at one point, and my wife had moved out. It didn't look like I was going to get tenure, and I was walking down the street in New Orleans, and I was like, hey, this can't get any worse.
Hey, so nat ones are fun too, Yeah.
I walked into a comic book store, and I discovered, like, comic books are on fire. This was back in 2004. Comic books are on fire. I mean, Mark Millar was doing the Ultimates. Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee were doing Hush, and it was this return to the 70s and 60s superhero revival, but in this really visceral and sophisticated way. So some graduate students saw me reading a comic book, and they asked me to teach them a course, and I wasn't prepared to teach them a course, but I did an independent study. All this was back in New Orleans and Mississippi. I came back here, I showed up and my first teaching schedule was a lecture on comics. It was like, wait, you hired me to teach medieval literature. This is going to sell. So get in there.
Yeah.
So I did that. I ended up doing this massive online course, a MOOC on comics. And from there, I did administration. And I did administration for ultimately 15 years, but 5 years here at Boulder really heavily. And I know I'm going on, but there's a point to this. The administration, I went into it really like a little bunny rabbit. Like, yeah, we're going to make changes. And it really is exhausting. And anybody that stays in it, it's like politics. It's looking over your shoulder, and it's just exhausting. And by the end, after 5 years, I gained 40 pounds heavier than I am now. And I was sneaking a cigarette every now and then. And a friend of mine said, she had the grace not to say, hey, you look like shit. But she gave me a copy of the Player's Handbook, 5th edition. That was in January last, the before. And so by and by, I resigned from the administration, went back to teaching, and I opened up the Player's Handbook, and like the moment of going into the comic store, it was like, things aren't great in my life right now, but here's this imaginative portal, a book. Here's a book I can open, and it's a portal into something so super fantastic that's thriving and that I always knew was super fantastic, but I had turned away from to go pursue these more adult things. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So how do I sign up for your class? Because I just want to do it now. Like, let's go. Everything's online. Yeah. Come on, this is amazing. That's so cool, man. That's just like, it's cool to see. When I hear that story, I just can kind of like see you find this kind of like thread between all of these things. Like I was. When you said admin, I was like, oh yeah, the real superheroes? You mean the people who are like going to work every day and doing all the bullshit hard work and like actually changing a lot of things sometimes? As there's like all of these little things that you can see these connections between medieval literature, D&D, heroes. They're all just like struggling with how to do good, how to make change, like how to be a person in the world effectively. And so I don't know. It's just really, really cool to hear those connections because it makes me feel like these stories that we're all telling together, like have the substance that I feel like they have.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
And it speaks to the quality of the escapism, I think, with role-playing games. Like there's low quality escapism, which I consider like television and movies to be, where you'd like turn off your brain. You could sit there and you're kind of on autopilot. But I think tabletop role-playing games, it is that portal. It's like, hey, do you want to spend 4 hours like being somebody else in a different world? And you will be using your brain not only as much as you do normally, but probably even like a more or in like a creative way. I think that is part of that high quality escapism that you get with tabletop role-playing games for sure.
Yeah, escapism, Andrew, is such a weird concept, isn't it? And I coming off what you're saying, that there's active and there's passive, right? And I think passive has a place, right? At times,
truly
lulled and just out of your. But the active escapism, I'm not even sure how we fit escapism in there, because you are actively escaping something, right? Like last night, I had my weekly game last night. I don't DM, but I was a player. And boy, I was looking forward to that because I needed a break. Yeah. But it wasn't a break into passivity. It was a break into another activity.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's like different. It's just like trading out which tools you're using to work on the same problems. You're just like going from looking at it in this micro view to like zooming out, or putting the cartoon lens on it or whatever. Yeah. You're still kicking those tumblers around. So
I mean, I feel real stress in D&D games, like,
oh yeah,
like, oh, I'm just stewing in that stress, but then afterward it's like, oh, that's that world. Like it's cool. It's a cool phenomenon. William, when you run games, does your background in medieval literature, does that like flavor your games or the characters you play either? Do you think that your games have that added layer of like authority of like, this is actually how this tavern keeper would speak?
Do you spend the whole time correcting people? That's what I want to know. It's like, actually, no, yeah, of course, yeah.
You replace all the S's with F's and stuff, yeah.
A dear friend of mine, a dear medievalist friend of mine, has written a series of novels where Chaucer is a detective, and it's very perfect about like actually the innkeeper. And when I started DMing, just before COVID was when I returned and started DMing. I found quickly that I really didn't care about historical precision. What I cared about was that the narrative had drive, and that I felt like my characters were under that shoulder pressure you just described, Andrew, to work in the narrative, and that just kind of like I didn't have any random encounters or any like treasure tables where, oh, you got the goggles of seeing for no reason. Like, to me, what I found was important was that the narrative had places for them to work through. And I guess for me, that really spoke to me on a larger level of English professor, kind of on a disciplinary level rather than on a subdisciplinary level.
Yeah, it's
Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah,
because I mean, there's a lot of transition in D&D right now. There's a lot of like reckoning about the problematic ideas of that, you know, orcs are all like this or whatever, and I think some of the best, and there's it's true with like Cthulhu games too, of like dealing with the fact that H.P. Lovecraft is a huge freaking racist, and it's a powerful thing, I think, is seeing a lot of people inside of these communities take these things apart and say like, look, we're not playing in like historically accurate night world. Like, we are in this world because we want magic and we don't want to be doing like cars. And so like, what does it mean to kind of like look at the structure of a society, of a world, when you're like, where does food come from? Why is there a bank? What are the power structures? And have it be able to be simplified. And like, we all know that, you know, when we're playing this game, and no one's looking at you in these sessions and being like, can you tell us how, if this person accurately is describing the food here? Because because you're exactly what you're saying, where you're connected to like, does this thing matter? Is this story here? Yeah.
Totally. Would you bringing it more up to speed with your now that you're teaching comic books, in what ways would you say your love of comic books informs the way you DM or play? Is there any like link to that?
So one thing that I've found is that DMing, playing, it hits on so many creative levels, and it hits on acting and performance. It hits on imagining and also tracking story, and it also hits on drawing and the tactile feeling of creating your character. And I have found that I love to draw my characters. So my research in medieval literature was actually on the transition from manuscript books to printing, and I wrote books on books. And my love of comics are because they are tactile. I mean, you can read comics on screen. There's a tremendous universe of webcomics, but in the end, to kind of have a comic in your hand, let's see, what do I have here? Cerberus the Aardvark. There's a little overlap between the, I mean, I don't know.
I don't know that comic, but I want to now. Holy God.
Yeah, it's great. I haven't read it in a long time.
An aardvark, Conan the Barbarian, who goes through the world having adventures. And what's kind of crazy about it is everything's drawn tremendously, except it's an aardvark going through reality. Yeah. I'm losing track of your question. For me, what's wonderful about comic books,
I love it,
is that it's hitting me on multiple registers. visual, narrative, textual, and that's so intrinsic to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking, it's interesting because the comic world gets closed down in 1954. The U.S. government steps in and starts censoring comics, 1954. And superheroes are just smashed, and crime comics and science fiction comics, it's all out. And comics build up with the Marvel explosion in 61, 62, really. And then by the 70s, people are beginning to explore all kinds of things. And there's a French publication called Screaming Metal, Metal Hurlant, which is the beginnings of heavy metal, which is a magazine here. And that's like 75? 74. And then heavy metal comes out, and Conan the Barbarian by Marvel Comics comes out in 1970. And then Savage Swords of Conan is like 74. And then Cyrus the Aardvark is 77, and that's self-published. And then ElfQuest is 78. All these energies are happening in the early to mid to late 70s, where people are coming up with these fantasy comics that are flying in the face of censorship. And, you know, there's Tactical Studies research in 74 coming up with the original box set, and then in 77 the basic set. So it's all kind of in there together in this smelting pot where fantasy and narrative and illustration and imagination and illicitness, right? Conan, Red Sonja, oh my God, you know, let's shut that down. It's all in there in the same smelting pot. And I don't know. I don't know if that...
No.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm a huge comic book fan, and I feel the same brain chemicals gleek when I sit around paging through the Player's Handbook as when I've got one of my favorite comics. Like, I've read the Player's Handbook cover to cover now numerous times, but I'll still just for fun, I'll sit down with a sandwich and I'm like, I just want to look at these pictures, and I just want to like read these little snippets of stuff. And it's like a comic. It's like a favorite comic book. I know this story. I've read this comic countless times, but it's just very pleasant to sit there and just look through it for whatever reason.
I agree with you completely. And comics are often defined as a sequential literature. They're sequential because you're supposed to follow the little pictures. And what you bring up, Andrew, is I don't think comics are really sequential at all.
Well, they sure as hell aren't when you're a kid, you know? Like, I never owned them from the beginning or whatever. Yeah. And I just, like, would look at, like, I would look at one and just fall into a single frame and just be like, this, I'm already here. Like, yeah.
And the narrative, right? Like, who can keep up with what Batman... I mean, it's not sequential. It's not sequential. It's visual and it's connected. And I think D&D, though D&D tries to be linear, right? It's always branching. Everything's branching.
Yeah,
100%. And every DM knows that. Like, you can have a story arc you think is like, this is going to come through clearly, and the players are going to like bite on this, and it's going to be, and it's like, no, they didn't. That story arc, it just like faded away. They wanted this other story arc, and
all of a sudden, a nameless NPC is like
comic book,
the most important person in the campaign.
Very comic book-esque in terms of from issue to issue or episode to episode, how those story arcs can change for sure.
Yeah.
And players forget. That, to me, that's the saddest, is if you haven't played in a while and they're like, we don't remember what's happening. It's like, oh no, like, and you just have to change it up.
But it's not what the players are there for, really. I mean, they are, but
they just want to, they just want to play.
But that's man, there's like I just see like wormhole, like hallways whizzing by that I want to fall down with you, and but we got a good question in the chat.
Yeah, we have questions in chat, and we also have this roll table. So let's, if you have the D20, if you could roll that, we'll do the roll table first.
How old I'm getting? I automatically get my glasses on when I roll
for the
old. 12 immediate.
12.
Oh,
okay. I mean, this one I'm interested in your answer as a comic book authority. This is a device employed by a lot of comic books. Do you think red herrings are overused? And in your narrative adventures, like how often do you use them, and what techniques do you have for them?
So not big on red herrings because Harlan alluded to the NPC who shows up and like all of a sudden the characters gravitate to it. And I find that if you put in something that you're not really committed to, it's going to become the actual focus of the whole thing. Also not really interested. I associate the red herring with mainstream comics' desire to get every Batman villain in the issue, no matter what the plot is. Like, gotta have Two-Face. Oh, gotta have Joker. Harley's there. Gotta have Catwoman. If there's not a kiss, and so the plot gets overwhelmed by all the little MacGuffins and red herrings that are thrown in there. So I don't know if that answers, but in my whole life, I strive towards kind of streamlining simplicity so that I can get the main plot out there and then spend some time on it.
Man, it's good you're a professor then. That's like the work, right? Like, yeah.
Well, I have to say, I just got a note from one of my students in a survey that basically it wasn't, from that student's perspective, it wasn't that way at all. It was in fact just the universe and just carrying on. So I have myself back to simplicity because my own desire is to wander down every possible.
No, I love it. Just asking you questions. I could see how fun of a teacher you'd be because we ask you a question and then you're like, oh, well, we got to start here. And I love that's such a exciting aspect of knowing anything. So that's cool.
Yeah, I like walking that road.
Yeah, I think my struggle as a DM, I think a desire I always have is for, and a thing I love about comic books too, is for the world to feel like it's just operating with or without you. For like this universe to exist as well. And my X-Men are my favorite superheroes because it just is like, you're like, oh, think of all the mutants out there. Like think all of these possibilities. But I totally agree. That happens in all of my campaigns is I like that aspect of like, oh, let's put this here. Let's put this here. You guys can do whatever you want. Like, here are all these things you can do. And it's that needle is just tough to get in the right spot there. Because I agree. Like, misinformation can tell a whole story by itself. But at the same time, if they get to the end of that dungeon and there's just, a middle finger at the end, it sucks. So, yeah, it's tough.
Definitely.
What's your favorite superhero?
Wait, what's that?
What's your favorite superhero, Andrew?
Mine, I don't know if he's a superhero. Mine would be Hellboy, I think, by Mike Mignola. I have like every issue. I have all the BPRDs. I have all that stuff. I just like the world, and I love Mike Mignola's art, and so yeah, I think it's.
Is it even fair to ask you yours?
Yeah. What's?
In the end, it's Batman. It's Batman. I have to say, right? Like.
Nice. Hell yeah.
Yeah. And Batman is real hit or miss because most of those Batman comics should be thrown away. I mean, they're just not. But then you hit these incredible
good ones. Yeah, I agree.
Incredible ones that are like the graphic novel of the 20th century, right? It's like.
So you probably already know this, but there's a Batman Hellboy Starman crossover, 2-issue crossover by Mike Mignola, and it's good.
It's good. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen the art on that.
Wait, what's the one that you feel like is the one of the 20th century? The Batman one?
Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns.
Okay, cool.
It's up there. Yeah. Don't get me going.
That's the one where he fights old Superman or they're both old and he fights Superman at the end?
He fights young, he fights old, he's grumpy.
I haven't read that in a long time.
That is a hell of a comic, but that's a hell of a comic. And Frank Miller, who he seems to be coming out of it, but he was a pretty odious guy for a long time. He did that, and then he turned around and he did Batman Year One. And as long as I'm making some recommendations, those two are like real opposite. Dark Knight Returns is kind of definitive, and it's out there, and it moves towards cartooning, which a lot of people don't like because they want to see kind of cut Batman. But it moves towards cartooning and more to that Mike Mignola kind of bam, you know. And then Frank Miller then did with Dave Mazzucchelli, he did Batman Year One, and I would just run out to the comic book store and get both of those. Because Batman Year One, it's like a straight telling of Batman's origin and his first year, and it's just great.
Nice. Yeah, I have not read that. So
I'm sorry, I can't shut up. I'm going to continue on this for one more minute.
No, do it. You just have to hang out with us longer because there's some good questions in the chat. That's all.
Have me back. Batman Hush is kind of one of the most lush Batman stories you can imagine. Jim Lee is just an incredible illustrator, and Batman Hush, you can see every vein in his eye, every bruise is perfectly drawn. I mean, it's just an amazing story. So you get Batman Hush, but then right after that, Batman Broken City came out, and it's a complete noir Batman. Like, Batman is essentially Humphrey Bogart. You know, he's more buff than Humphrey, but he's Humphrey Bogart going through the dark city, the broken city, and he's all in shadows. And if he could have a cigarette, at one point he even flirts with the femme fatale, which, like, and he does it. It's perfect because you're like, okay, I buy it. Batman has no sexual, but I buy this. Those dames. You know?
Yeah, that pulp cartoon like interaction, like social interaction of like, I think this is what you do kind of thing. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I do like Detective Batman more than Punch 'Em Up Batman.
Me too.
When it's like, oh yeah, he is like he's figuring this out. I like that angle more than like he's a rich guy in a suit somehow able to hang in there with superpowered aliens and gods.
If it tells you anything about the games I run too, it's like I love it when he's like, yeah, I know a guy, and he like shows up. Oh, that's a cool cover.
There it is.
Broken City. Really love it.
We have two great questions in chat.
How you gonna leave this, huh? Killer Croc in a tiger skin shirt. Batman, you can't even see his face, just his smile.
Nice. I love it. This is a question from our buddy Jason Wardell in chat. What old text would you like to see as a D&D campaign setting?
Gawain and the Green Knight, but you couldn't. I don't know how you would do it, but Gawain and the Green Knight, for some reason for me, it resonates with D&D. It just drips with it. There's something about the way Gawain in the story, if you haven't read it, it does have a surprise ending, which is surprising for, you know, a text written in 1370, 1373, whatever it is. But Gawain kind of levels up throughout the story, and it just resonates with a kind of Dungeons and Dragons, like, you got to learn and you got to get better. And even when you're best, even when you're 11th level, you still don't have it. You're still rolling a 1. Right?
Because he's got to be willing to lose. That's like his whole thing. Is he walks in there and he's like, yeah, okay, I'll die. Like that's I'm into it. You know. Yeah.
Is that the campaign? Is that it's only Gawain and his horse Grindelwald, right? So I don't know how you translate it. You'd have to fix it up so there could be hobbits and half elves, everybody going along too.
Is that the story that movie The Green Knight was based off of? That was supposed to come out and then we got robbed of it?
I don't know.
There's a movie coming out called The Green Knight that looked super cool. Sounds like it was this story. Here's another question we have this is great from Devin in chat. If you could make a comic book of any D&D character that you've ever played, who would it be and why?
I don't think I'm there yet, because remember, I took so many years off. You know, I had some great characters when I was in high school, and now I have some characters that I'm really enjoying, but I'm not sure that I'm there at the guy. I have to say, I have this one barbarian who started out Conan, and now I've multi-classed him over to Vengeance Paladin, and he's more Batman, like focused on that one vengeance. And so he might develop, but I'm not there yet. He wouldn't.
What's the kid character? What's the character that like stands out to you as like the one you played like all the way through, or that like just sticks in your head?
It wasn't my character. my friend's character had a little hobbit, Beatty Blickacompile Melopalatheus III, who was this was in 79, right? I mean, you didn't have like Lucky Hobbit, but he just reeked of that Hobbit Lucky gleeful, like, oh, I fell, oh, I'm hanging off a tree. And that was a great character. That was a great character. Was still trying to work out this.
I mean, you remember his name decades later. That's what you want. That's what these characters want. They want that immortality of being remembered
later. I remember
years later.
So I got to tell this absurdly embarrassing story.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I grew up in an apartment building in New York City, and it was old. It was old. It was before the Museum of Natural History, which, you know, mid 19th century. It was rumored always that the original landlord was buried in the basement. So my friend and I, one night, after playing until like 3 a.m, we got all dressed up in leather jerkins and, you know, pajama bottoms turned into whatever, pants tucked into our boots. And we decided flashlights would not fit. So we got candles. So we go down into the basement of the apartment building, and we jimmy the door, and we get into the basement. Well, it's an ancient building. It's, you know, early 19th century, mid 19th century. So it's like a catacombs in there. We're wandering around. It's been vandalized, so there's pornographic graffiti. And we go through room after room, and we're living it, right? We got our candles. We're going along. We get into this final room, and this is as true as anything in my life. We come to this room. We put the candle down on this big thing. And at that point, the superintendent comes down the stairs, sees that the door to the basement is open. He slams it shut. The wind blows through.
Oh, God.
Candle. So now we've got matches, and we're trying with our flint and tinder to light. We light up the candle, and we realize that it is on this stone or concrete structure about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, bolted into the ground, a slab on a box, and it's got to be the original landlord. So at that point, it's you know, feet, do your stuff. So
yeah,
we're 15 years old. Our imaginations are maybe 14. We go back to the door, and it's bolted shut from the outside. So we go to this crawl space window, and I'm very short. So my friend boosts me up and pushes me through. So I tumble out onto Columbus Avenue in New York City at like 4 a.m, dressed as a medieval hobbit. No way to get back into the apartment building. And I don't know. I had to.
That's amazing. I love it.
That's so good, and that's where it starts. You know, that you're just chasing that feeling from then on. You're just trying to feel as alive as you did when you were a 14-year-old finding the landlord's body buried in the basement. Right?
the crypt of the landlord.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good one shot. A pretty good one shot setting.
Yeah, that is the comic. It would be a kind of Stranger Thing, the Crypt of the Landlord.
Crypt of the Landlord. I love it. I love that. Well, cool. I feel like we could.
Thank you so much for doing our show. Yeah, this was such a great episode. And thanks for chatting us. Thanks for everyone in chat who watched and shot us those questions. That was great.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to plug, William? Anything? Your books? Anything?
Nope, nothing to plug.
Plugged plenty of Batman. I feel like I have a reading
cool
list.
Batman Rex. Yeah.
I don't get a cut off Frank Miller or.
Yeah.
No. I mean, the only thing I'd plug is that I think that Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know. This may be arbitrary and forced, but I think that any imaginative activity that includes within it the sense of reflection that we've been talking about, the sense of not just telling a narrative and embodying it, but also reflecting on how that works. I think any of that is so powerful and so ultimately so serviceable to the individual as really a therapeutic and empowering tool. Seems to me we're in a very hopeless time in so many ways. And if we pause for a moment, we can just be overwhelmed by how desperate this time is. And yet, something as joyful and as seemingly escapist and frivolous, I truly believe hits at a fundamental nature of human creativity and therefore generative energy. So play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Print it.
Yeah.
Print
I
it.
love it. This is why you should run games. Go run games for your friends. It's therapeutic. You're helping them.
I think
I love it. That was great.
That was great.
All right.
Thank you for saying that. I feel good.
I feel good.
Harlan runs our D&D game right here on this stream. If you're watching and you're new to it, it's called Better Than Heroes. It's every Monday night at 7 p.m. Pacific. If you want to check that out, we play D&D in the Spelljammer world. Tomorrow, for October, we're trying to do some spooky new stuff. Tomorrow night, we will be streaming the infamous horror game 10 Candles, and that will be tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Pacific. It is a horror game where everyone dies by the end of the game. It's very fun to play. It sounds grim, but it is. I think it's kind of a celebration of like the human spirit in a way. It's very interesting to see what the players do as the world compresses and implodes around them. So that's tomorrow night on this same stream. We have comedian Kyle Kinane's going to be playing. It's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, just thanks for tuning in and watching our shows.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you next week, and don't forget to tip your DM.
If you can, shoot him a buck.
All right. See y'all. Thank you.